My future mother-in-law told me our wedding needed 300 guests, a ballroom, and a photographer who'd shot 2 celebrity weddings I'd actually heard of. When I said we couldn't afford that, she said not to worry about money. 3 weeks later, I found out exactly whose money she meant, and it wasn't hers. To understand how we got there, I need to back up. I'm a veterinary technician. I met Ethan 5 years ago when he brought in a golden retriever with a torn ACL and cried in the waiting room while I explained the surgery options. Not because he was weak, because he'd had that dog since he was 14 and didn't know how to watch her get old. I liked him immediately. Anyone who cries over a dog in a waiting room full of strangers is someone who isn't afraid of being seen. We dated for 3 years before we moved in together, and we've lived together for 2. In that time I've learned that Ethan alphabetizes spice racks, cannot fall asleep without a fan running even in winter, and gets quietly stubborn about exactly one thing at a time, usually something small, like how to load a dishwasher, while being endlessly flexible about everything else. He's a civil engineer. He designs drainage systems and retaining walls, the unglamorous infrastructure that keeps neighborhoods from flooding, and he takes a strange, private pride in the fact that nobody ever thinks about his work unless it fails. We talked about money early the way you're supposed to. We talked about kids 2, maybe 3, not yet. We weren't in a hurry to get married. When he proposed on a Tuesday in our kitchen, with a ring he'd been carrying around in his backpack for 2 weeks because he kept losing his nerve, it didn't feel like a plot twist. It felt like paperwork for something we'd already decided. I want to be clear about that, because everything that happened afterward makes it sound like our relationship was troubled. It wasn't. Ethan is a good man. This is a story about how good men sometimes spend their whole lives being trained not to say no, and what it costs them and the people who love them when they finally have to learn. We landed on a number early, $15,000, most of it savings, a little of it a loan we'd pay off ourselves. 45 guests. A restored barn about 40 minutes outside the city that a friend of a friend used for their reception, with exposed beams and big sliding doors that opened onto a field. String lights. Food from a taco truck we both loved. My cousin, who does photography as a side hustle for 4 hours. Wildflowers instead of florist arrangements, because my mother is good with a garden and offered to grow half of them herself. I know how that sounds to some people. Small, maybe even a little cheap. To me it sounded like a party where I'd actually get to talk to everyone I loved instead of working a room. We booked a walkthrough of the barn on a Saturday in March. The owner, a woman named Diane who'd converted the space after her husband died and she needed something to do with her hands, walked us through the whole layout, pointed out where the ceremony would go, where the tables would go, where the fairy lights ran along the rafters. Ethan held my hand the entire time and didn't let go once. I remember thinking, this is going to be the easiest year of my life. We told my parents first. My mom cried a little and immediately started talking about which flowers would be in season. My dad asked, gently, whether we'd thought about a slightly bigger guest list so his brother's family wouldn't feel snubbed, and we said we'd think about it, and that was the whole conversation. 15 minutes, maybe. Then we told Ethan's parents over dinner at their house, Victoria and Robert Caldwell, a name that means something in certain circles of this city, mostly because Victoria has spent 30 years making sure it does. She's a luxury real estate agent, the kind who sells houses by first selling herself. Her instincts, her taste, her ability to walk into a room and tell you what kind of person you are within 4 minutes. She is genuinely charming. I want to be fair about that. The first 3 years I knew her, I liked her. When we told her about the barn, about the taco truck, about the 45 guests, she smiled the whole time we talked. At the end she said, "That's charming." I didn't clock it, I actually thanked her. It took me weeks to understand that charming was the word Victoria used for things she had already decided not to take seriously. 2 weeks later, Ethan came home from a lunch with his mother looking like someone had rearranged his skeleton. "She thinks we should reconsider the venue," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Reconsider how?" She said it's not, she used the word appropriate, not appropriate for a Caldwell wedding. I laughed, actually laughed, before I realized he was serious. "Ethan, it's a barn, it's beautiful." "I know," I told her that. "What did she say?" He rubbed the back of his neck, a habit I'd come to recognize as the physical shape of him trying to avoid conflict by sheer force of will. "She said some important people are going to want to be there. Clients, people from the neighborhood association. She said a 40-person barn wedding sends a message she doesn't want to send." Sends a message to who? I don't know, I didn't ask. That should have been my first real flag. Not that Victoria had an opinion, everyone has opinions about weddings, but that Ethan hadn't asked the obvious follow-up question. At the time I told myself he was just being diplomatic. Conflict-avoidant people are good at that, making their own passivity look like tact. I tried to be generous. I told Ethan we could look at slightly bigger venues, ones that still felt intimate but could flex to maybe 60 guests if some Coldwell business contacts needed seats. I was trying to build a bridge. I didn't yet understand that Victoria wasn't negotiating a bridge, she was negotiating a demolition. What happened over the next 6 weeks felt, in retrospect, less like planning a wedding and more like watching a tide come in. Every concession created the conditions for the next demand. We agreed to look at a slightly larger venue. Victoria said the one we found, a renovated event space downtown, still tasteful, still within reach if we stretched, would do if it had to. Our budget went from $15,000 to $25,000. She suggested a florist she knew, someone who did event design for the kind of weddings that get photographed for magazines nobody in my family reads. 25 became 40. She mentioned, almost offhand, that she knew a photographer, the same one, it turned out, who'd shot the wedding of a local news anchor's daughter. 40 became 55. Somewhere in there she brought up a guest list of her own, people from her office, clients, a state senator's chief of staff, neighbors from 3 streets over that I'd never met and Ethan had met maybe twice. The list had 90 names on it before I even saw a draft. I kept waiting for Ethan to push back and he kept almost doing it. He'd raise an objection at dinner and then 20 minutes later find a reason it wasn't worth the fight. It's just flowers, Nat. It's one extra vendor. She's not wrong that Dad's clients matter for his business. Each individual concession sounded reasonable. It was only the pattern that wasn't. By early June, we were looking at a number close to $60,000, for a wedding I no longer recognized as anything we'd planned. I finally sat Ethan down and said the thing I'd been avoiding saying directly. We can't afford this, I mean that literally, we do not have this money. He looked relieved, actually, like I'd said the thing he hadn't let himself say. I know. So what do we do? I'll talk to her. He did talk to her. He came back and told me with an odd flatness in his voice, she says we don't need to worry about the cost, she's got it handled. Handled how? Is she paying for it? She didn't exactly say. Ethan, who's paying? He didn't answer that question for almost 3 weeks, and when I look back now, I think it's because he genuinely didn't know, and some part of him didn't want to know badly enough to ask. There's a conversation from that period I still think about more than almost any other, because it was the first time I understood, really understood, what I was up against, and it wasn't Victoria. It was the shape of 30 years of Ethan's life. We were in the car, coming back from yet another vendor meeting Victoria had scheduled without fully consulting us. A tasting for a catering company we hadn't chosen, with a menu we hadn't approved, at a price point that made my stomach hurt. I can't keep doing this, I said. Every week it's a new person, a new number, a new thing we apparently already agreed to. I know it's a lot. It's not a lot, Ethan, it's not ours. This isn't our wedding anymore. It's your mother's party with our names on the invitations. He was quiet for a long time, driving, hands tight on the wheel. Can we let her have this one? He finally said. She's been planning big things for this family her whole life. It matters to her more than it matters to us. We'll get married either way. Does it have to be a fight? It's our wedding. I know. It's supposed to be about us. I know, Nat, but she's my mother. I want to describe what that sentence did to me, because I think it's the thing a lot of people don't understand about relationships like ours until they're inside one. It wasn't cruel. He wasn't choosing her over me in some dramatic, obvious way. He was doing what he'd been doing his entire life, treating his mother's comfort as a fixed cost of being alive, something you plan around rather than something you're allowed to negotiate. I realized, sitting in that car, that the actual problem wasn't Victoria's demands. It was that Ethan was more afraid of his mother's disappointment than he was of mine. And I didn't yet know why that fear ran so deep. I just knew it was going to be the real fight of our engagement, long before I understood what Victoria was actually protecting. The overheard conversation that cracked the whole thing open happened by accident, the way these things usually do. I'd stopped by Victoria and Robert's house to drop off a folder of my mother's flower sketches. An olive branch, honestly, an attempt to include Victoria in something small and give her a version of ownership that didn't cost $60,000. Victoria was on the back patio on the phone, and the sliding door was open, and I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, I promise you. I was just standing in the kitchen deciding whether to interrupt. "No, it'll be beautiful, that's not the concern," she was saying. "The concern is optics. If the Whitfields see the family and decline right when we're renegotiating with the investors, that's the whole relationship gone. This wedding needs to look like nothing has changed." I stood very still. Robert's handling his end, I'm handling ours. 300 people, half of them people who matter, and nobody in that room walks away thinking the Coldwells are struggling. I didn't hear anything else. She turned and saw me in the doorway, and her whole face rearranged itself into warmth, so fast it was like watching a switch flip. "Natalie, I didn't hear you come in." I gave her the folder. I said something about the flowers. I left as quickly as I reasonably could. In the car, I called Ethan. "Do you know anything about investors? Something about your dad renegotiating with someone." "Investors?" He sounded genuinely confused. "Mom's clients are probably coming to the wedding, that's probably what you heard. She's always networking." She said the wedding needs to look like nothing has changed. Changed from what, Ethan? I don't know, I really don't. I believed him. That's the thing people leave out of stories like this. I believed him completely, and he was telling the truth. Whatever was happening in his parents' finances, they had kept it from their own son as carefully as they'd kept it from me. Maybe more carefully. It took another 2 weeks, and a fight with Victoria that I'd been avoiding for months to get real clarity. She'd sent over a final guest list, 280 names, along with a seating chart that grouped tables not by relationship, but, I realized after staring at it for 10 minutes, by net worth and professional relevance. My cousin's family, 4 people I love dearly, tucked at a back table near the kitchen doors. A couple I'd never met, labeled only Whitfield, very important, table 1. I drove to her office. I don't usually do things like that. I am by nature someone who writes a text, deletes it, writes a calmer version and sends that instead. But something in me had run out of patience to spend. "I'm not hosting a corporate event disguised as my wedding," I told her, standing in front of her desk while she looked mildly startled that I hadn't called first. "Natalie, I don't know what you think this is. I think it's a networking event. I think you're using my wedding to convince a room full of your clients that your family is fine. I want to know why." She recovered fast, she always did, and her voice took on the tone I'd later come to recognize as her negotiating voice, calm, a little pitying, designed to make you feel like the unreasonable one in the room. "You're marrying into this family, Natalie. Weddings have always served more than one purpose. That's not scandalous, that's how families like ours have always worked." "I'm not marrying this family," I said. "I'm marrying Ethan." She didn't have a response to that. It was the first time in 7 months I'd seen Victoria Coldwell without an immediate answer, and for one single second, I saw something underneath the composure that looked less like offense and more like fear. I didn't understand it yet. I filed it away anyway, because some instinct told me it mattered. I hadn't planned to be the one who found out the real story, but Robert Coldwell has always been easier to talk to than his wife. Mostly because he talks so rarely that when he does, people actually listen. He caught me alone in their kitchen a few days after the fight with Victoria, while she was upstairs on another call. He was pouring 2 glasses of water without asking if I wanted one, which was very Robert. He assumed you wanted what he wanted to give you, and was usually right. "She's not trying to hurt you," he said, not looking up. "I need you to know that, whatever else you think of her right now." "Then what is she trying to do, Robert?" He was quiet long enough that I thought he wasn't going to answer. "Then, 2 years ago I put a significant amount of the firm's capital into a development project, waterfront condos, North Side. It was supposed to be the thing that set us up for the next 20 years. He finally looked at me. It collapsed. Zoning issues, then a contractor who cut corners we didn't catch until it was too late, then a market that turned against us at exactly the wrong moment. We are carrying more debt than either of us has admitted to anyone, including Ethan." "Including Ethan," I repeated. "Especially Ethan. Victoria didn't want him carrying that weight before his own wedding. And he set the glasses down carefully like they might break. I let her decide that because I didn't have the courage to tell him myself. "So the wedding," The wedding is supposed to prove to a room full of people who could destroy what's left of my career that we're not in trouble. If our investors think we're desperate, they pull out, and everything Victoria has spent 30 years building goes with it. She's not doing this because she's shallow, Natalie. She's doing it because she's terrified, and this is the only language she knows how to be terrified in. I sat down at their kitchen island because my legs genuinely didn't feel steady. That doesn't make it okay, I said finally. No, Robert agreed. It doesn't, but I wanted you to understand it before you decided we were monsters. If I'd stopped there, I might have found my way to something softer, faster. But 2 days later I discovered the thing that actually broke my trust in the entire situation, not just Victoria's judgment but her boundaries. A caterer called our house, not Victoria's, asking to confirm a deposit under the Caldwell Harper wedding, referencing a contract that had apparently already been signed. Ethan's signature was on it. Ethan had never seen it. He went white reading the email forward I sent him at work. He called the caterer, then the florist, then the venue Victoria had been quietly locking in behind our backs. A 250-person hotel ballroom, deposits paid, contracts signed, all under his name, all without his knowledge, using a signature stamp he didn't know his mother had access to from some family document years ago. He came home that night and didn't say much. He sat at our kitchen table with his laptop open to 4 separate vendor contracts he hadn't authorized, and I watched something in him go very still and very cold in a way I'd never seen before. She used my name, he said, like he was trying the sentence out to see if it was true. She signed contracts using my name. Ethan. She's been planning a wedding I didn't agree to, using money we don't have, and when I wasn't fast enough to fall in line, she forged it. She didn't even ask. I didn't say anything. I'd been waiting 7 months for him to arrive at this sentence on his own, and I wasn't going to hand it to him. It had to be his. Victoria didn't apologize for the contracts. She explained them. I was moving things along because you two were dragging your feet and dates were disappearing, she told Ethan, like she'd done him a favor. When he told her calmly that we were cancelling every vendor she'd booked and returning to our original plan, the barn, the 45 guests, the $15,000 budget, she didn't argue. She delivered an ultimatum instead, in the eerily composed voice of someone who has planned exactly this contingency. If you have that wedding, she told him, I won't be there. And I think you should reconsider whether your father and I continue helping with the down payment on a house, given that we clearly can't count on this family to make sensible, unified decisions. Ethan told me about it that night, sitting on the edge of our bed, staring at his hands. She's threatening the house money, he said. I know. She's threatening to not come to our wedding. I know that too. He looked up at me, and for the first time in this entire ordeal, I saw a version of Ethan I hadn't met before, not defeated, not scrambling to keep the peace, just tired in a way that looked like the beginning of clarity. I don't need you to choose me over your mother, I told him, because I'd rehearsed this sentence in my head for weeks, waiting for the moment it would land. I need you to choose our marriage. Those aren't the same thing, and I think you've been treating them like they are for your entire life. He didn't answer that night. I didn't expect him to. Some decisions need to sit in a person's chest for a while before they can be spoken out loud. What I hadn't accounted for was how far Victoria would go once it was clear direct pressure on Ethan wasn't working fast enough. She started calling relatives. My understanding, pieced together later from 3 different cousins, was that her version of events painted me as controlling, ungrateful, and determined to humiliate the Caldwell family by refusing a generous gift. Several people I barely knew started reaching out with concerned, gently accusatory messages. She's just trying to make your wedding special. Ethan's aunt told me at a family barbecue I hadn't wanted to attend. Couldn't you compromise a little? My own father asked me, not for the first time. My dad has always been the peacekeeper in our family, and this situation offended his sense of order. 2 families in conflict, surely there was a middle path. It's a big gesture, Nat. Some families would kill for in-laws who want to spend that kind of money. That one strung more than I expected, because it came from someone I trusted, and because for about 4 days it actually worked on me. I started wondering if I was the unreasonable one. Was I punishing Victoria for loving her son the only way she knew how? Was I so attached to my small, quiet vision of a wedding that I couldn't see a generous alternative sitting right in front of me? It took a conversation with my mother to pull me back. "Do you actually want the big wedding?" she asked me, "or do you just feel guilty for not wanting it?" "I feel guilty." "That's not the same question, sweetheart." She was right, I didn't want 300 strangers at my wedding. I didn't want a seating chart organized by net worth. I wanted the barn, the string lights, my cousin behind a camera, my dad crying during the toast because he cries at everything. Guilt had just gotten loud enough to drown that out for a while. The final piece of this fell into place in Victoria's kitchen, of all places. On an evening I'd gone over to return a serving dish and ended up staying for a conversation neither of us had planned. She looked different that night. Smaller somehow, without the armor of a client meeting or a family dinner to perform for. "I know what you think of me," she said before I'd even set the dish down. "I don't think you're a villain, Victoria. I think you're scared, and I think you've been scared for a long time, and I think you decided my wedding was the place to solve it." She was quiet for a moment, turning a dish towel over in her hands. "I didn't want a beautiful wedding," she finally said, and her voice had none of its usual polish. "I wanted one last night where nobody could see that we were falling apart. One night where everyone who matters looks at us and thinks they're fine, they're still the Coldwells, nothing has changed. I've spent 30 years building something, Natalie, and it's been coming apart in my hands for 2 years, quietly, where no one can see, and I thought if I could just get through one more event, one more perfect night, I could buy us time to fix it before anyone noticed." I let that sit for a second before I answered, because I understood it, genuinely, in a way I hadn't expected to. "I understand why you were scared," I told her. "I do, but you don't get to use my marriage to hide your problems. You don't get to sign contracts in your son's name and call it help. Whatever is happening to your business, to your reputation, that's yours to solve, not mine, not ours." She didn't argue. She just nodded once and looked, for the first time since I'd met her, genuinely her age. Ethan drew his boundary 2 days later. At a dinner he asked his parents to sit through without interrupting, which, if you knew Ethan before all this, was its own kind of miracle. "I love you both," he told them. "That's not in question, and it never has been, but I'm not going to build my marriage around keeping you comfortable. I'm not going to let you sign contracts with my name on them. I'm not going to let you tell our family that Natalie is the problem when the truth is I let this go too far because I was afraid of exactly this conversation." Victoria started to speak. He kept going, which was the part that surprised me most. "We are having the wedding we planned. 45 people, the barn, the budget we set. If you want to come, you're welcome, and I'd love to have you there. If you don't, that's your choice, and I'll grieve it, but I'm not changing my life to prevent it. And I don't want your money for the house. Not because I don't love you. Because I need to know that the choice is Natalie and I make her ours, and I can't know that as long as I'm afraid of what happens if I disagree with you." Robert reached over and put a hand on Victoria's arm before she could respond. It was the only time in this entire saga I saw him actively intervene, and it was enough. She didn't argue. She looked at her plate for a long time and then she said quietly, "Okay." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't forgiveness either on anyone's part. It was just the first honest sentence in the whole conversation. We got married in the barn in September, 45 guests, string lights, a taco truck, wildflowers my mother grew in her own backyard. My cousin took the photographs and cried behind the camera during the vows, which meant 3 of our best pictures are slightly out of focus, and I wouldn't trade them for a professional's perfect ones. Victoria didn't come. Robert didn't either, though he sent a card, handwritten, that Ethan still keeps in his desk drawer and doesn't talk about. My parents were there. Ethan's younger sister Chloe came without telling her mother beforehand and cried harder than anyone during the ceremony, which surprised all of us. The ceremony wasn't flawless. The sound system cut out twice during the vows, and it started drizzling right as we cut the cake, so we ended up crowding under the barn's overhang eating cake off paper plates while it rained on the string lights. It was, somehow, exactly the wedding we'd wanted, even the parts we hadn't planned. The financial trouble became public about 4 months later, not through us, but through an industry newsletter that covers exactly the kind of real estate circles Victoria has spent her career in. The details were ugly in the specific way financial failures always are. Names, numbers, a lawsuit from investors who felt misled. Some of Victoria's social circle disappeared overnight, the way social circles do when they were never really about affection to begin with. A few people stayed, fewer than she probably expected. Robert is working with a lawyer and, from what Ethan tells me, slowly, unglamorously, rebuilding something honest out of the wreckage of what he tried to hide. Ethan and Natalie, us, we helped where we could. We found them a financial advisor who wasn't emotionally entangled in 30 years of image management. We showed up for the hard conversations. We did not and have not given them money, and we did not let Victoria back into the day-to-day decisions of our marriage, even after she started, slowly, apologizing. Because that's the other thing nobody tells you about a story like this. The apology, when it finally comes, doesn't fix anything by itself. Victoria has apologized to me twice now, both times sincerely, both times in a smaller, quieter voice than the one she used to use with clients. I believe she means it. I also don't yet trust it, and I've told her that honestly, and, to her credit, she didn't argue with me about that either. Trust isn't a switch you flip back on because someone finally says the right words. It's something you rebuild in small increments, over years, the same slow way Ethan is rebuilding his ability to tell his mother no without flinching. For a long time I thought this was a story about a controlling mother-in-law who tried to steal my wedding. That's not wrong, exactly, but it's incomplete. The version I understand now is more complicated and honestly sadder. Victoria wasn't trying to steal a wedding. She was trying to use one last performance to hide a family that was quietly falling apart, because she genuinely believed that if the right people saw the right image, the actual collapse could still be stopped in time. She was wrong about that, and she hurt people getting there, and none of that excuses what she did. But it isn't the same thing as cruelty for its own sake, and I think understanding the difference mattered eventually to how we all moved forward. What surprised me more in the end was what I learned about Ethan. The real threat to our marriage was never Victoria, not really. Victoria could only get as far as Ethan let her. The real threat was his own inability, built over 29 years of practice, to say no to the people who raised him, and how close that habit came to costing him a marriage he actually wanted, simply because saying yes to his mother had always felt safer than risking her disappointment. He's different now. Not perfectly, he still catches himself sometimes softening a disagreement with his parents further than he needs to, and I still have to nudge him back to the line he drew that night at their dinner table. But he catches himself now. That's new. That's the whole change, really. Not that the fear disappeared, but that he stopped letting it drive. A few weeks ago we were sitting on our couch, going through the wedding photos, the slightly out-of-focus ones, the rain-soaked cake, my dad mid-sob during the toast, and Ethan looked at the one of us under the barn's overhang, laughing, soaked, cake on both our hands. I keep thinking about what it would have looked like, he said. The other version, 280 people, none of them really there for us. Do you regret it? He shook his head. I think that wedding would have been the first thing in our marriage that belonged to someone else. This is the only one that was ours. That's the part I keep coming back to, more than the drama, more than the money, more than Victoria's fear or Robert's shame or the year it took to untangle all of it. You can spend your whole life performing a version of yourself for people who need you to look a certain way. Or you can choose, even when it costs you something real, to actually live the life underneath the performance. We chose the barn. We chose the rain. We chose each other, on purpose, in front of the 45 people who came because they loved us, and not because someone had assigned them a table. That's the only wedding worth having in the end, the one you'd still choose if nobody important was watching.